Brunch and Bunch on Bonfire Radio. Your host, Pamela Ballard, a certified financial planner here to help take the bite out of your budget. Brunchandbudget.com. I'm your sound provider, Dialect, and here's your host, Pamela Capalid.
Thank you, Dialect, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. So, we are super excited about this show. We have Dedrick Asante-Muhammad, the Senior Fellow of the Racial Wealth Divide Initiative with Prosperity Now, back on. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's great to be back on.
Yes, with good news, right?
Yeah.
No?
I focus on the racial wealth divide, so it's not a lot of happy-go-lucky reports that I do.
But it's less. We always hear bad news, people talking all this stuff on the radio, and we hearing things and reading on the Twitter. But like, the world's getting better is what most science things have been saying, except for the climate, I guess, of the world.
Yeah.
But like other stuff, it's like they said we've killed like less people than we have in history, right? So this report is going to be happy, right? Optimistic.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's one of the big things about the report is, again, as you're alluding to, oftentimes the narrative around racial inequality is that it might not be where we want it to be, but it's getting better, right? And that's the general narrative.
Right.
But what we're showing in terms of racial economic inequality, particularly as it relates to wealth, that no, it's not getting better. We're actually, the country is going in a direction where racial wealth inequality is getting worse and worse. And I think it actually poses to be one of the greatest challenges to America's 21st century economy.
Wow.
And to psyche, because I mean, man, just getting that across to people is going to be insane.
All right, everybody, grab a drink while you listen to this episode.
For real. Well, I don't know how many people can even deal with the idea that not only have all the things not been getting better, but we're actually getting worse.
We're
we
moving backwards. Well, and I feel like, I read the report. So the new report came out this week, The Road to Zero Wealth. And I've already seen friends on Facebook sharing articles from like Forbes, and you saw something from The Guardian of the findings that you have in this report. This is a follow-up to the Ever-Growing Gap report that you put out last year. And I feel like, the title says it all, right? That
and I'll give the whole title: The Road to Zero Wealth: How the Racial Wealth Divide is hollowing out America's middle class.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think we've been feeling it. We've been seeing the reports of, wages being stagnant or going down, and in particular, Black and Latinx households are being affected the most, is I think what the report found, right?
Well,
and even, there's recently, who was it? I think Census put out some new poverty figures, and it's interesting that a lot of economists have been saying for a while, we're this many years into an economic recovery from the Great Recession. How come Americans don't feel it, right? And they try to go for psychological reasons. But I think one thing that this report doesn't focus on, but it's in here, is that no racial group, whether white, Black, Latino, we don't have data for Native Americans or Asian Americans as it relates to wealth, but I think it's pretty safe to assume no group has actually recovered in terms of wealth. Yeah. So the wealth they had pre-Great Recession to the wealth of today. Incomes might have come back, home ownership for some communities have come back, but wealth has not come back. And so that is, I think that's the one place where I agree that I could see white working class, white middle class feeling more economically insecure because they weren't at where they were less than 10 years ago. But I think, what our report highlights, though, is that if you look at the last 30 years, say between 1983 and 2013, that even with the ups and downs of the economy, white wealth has been growing, and it's it's not as fast as people would like. It's not as fast as it was the 30 previous years, but it has grown from $116 to $132,000 in 2013. That's white wealth.
Yeah.
But Black and Latino wealth has been, with ups and downs in those 30 years, been declining, so that we have Black wealth that's gone down to $1,700, and Latino wealth is at $2,000. So over that 30-year period, where so many people have talked about the emergence of the Black middle class, and it's been true, more Blacks and Latinos graduate from college than ever before, we still see a wealth disparity that's not maintaining, that is growing.
Well, and it's
I think
huge. Yeah, I
mean, no, that's right.
White wealth is at 6 figures, and Black and Latinx wealth is at 4 figures.
Well, and just anecdotally, the whole Black middle class thing, that happened when I was a kid. And most of the folks who I see now, definitely in the black community, are kids of those same kids.
Yes.
I don't feel like I hear as many stories, or I see in my own family or among my friend groups, folks just stumbling into the middle class like it happened in the 80s and 70s.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one thing we try to redefine in this report as well. We try to do a lot in this report is let's look at middle class not just by income anymore, not just if you hit a middle quintile, but let's look at middle class by wealth, and we define wealth. We look at we look at median wealth in 1983 before there was such a mass concentration of wealth in the United States, because it is true for everybody that how wealth has grown, it's grown for the wealthiest. So we said, so before that, let's look at 1983, look at median wealth for whites, because they're the only ones who really truly experienced the white middle class phenomenon, and then do a standard 2/3 to 2 times that. And so we get a middle class wealth determination of between about a little more than $65,000 to $200 and something thousand of median wealth.
And that's middle class.
That's middle class wealth.
Middle class wealth, yeah.
And then we see that only about 30% of blacks and Latinos fit into have middle class wealth, meaning I think it's $68,000 or more of wealth. That means 70% of us aren't even in that range, And so, and again, and for whites, it's 60%. The overwhelming majority of whites have middle class wealth or higher. So, So I think that's important for us to understand, because we have people who are first generation higher income, but they still don't have that middle class wealth.
Right. Let's take a step back and define. So
I wanted to unpack that a little more.
Because one of the things that I really thought was very powerful in the report is what you just described, is this idea of even if people are making more money, even if they're coming out of college with better jobs, higher paying jobs, there's a difference between being middle income and having middle class wealth.
Yes.
And can you define that for us in terms, what is income and what is wealth, and why are the two measurements important and very different?
Sure. So income is, obviously, fairly obviously, what you're taking in each year. For most people, it's through employment. Some people might have some type of investments that provide some type of yearly income, but it's how much money you're earning. Wealth is your assets. And what we look at is assets that include everything except for like durable goods. Like we don't include the value of your refrigerator or even your car, because most people, that's not something that you can easily leverage into money that can help you with things.
It's not an appreciating asset at all. The value is never going up. Yeah.
That's true. And so we include your value of your home. We include savings account. We include if you have stocks or your 401k, these type of investments. And we look at that minus your debts. You got to minus your debts now. It can't just be the value of your home and not how much you owe on your home. And if you look at your assets minus your debts, that gets your wealth. And, I think, if you look at the middle quintile, the middle 20% of the country, makes between $37,000 and $61,000, right? In income.
Okay,
now,
so that's like middle income, basically.
That's middle income.
37 to 61,000. Okay.
That's right. And whites at that income level have median wealth of $86,000. Okay?
More than what they're making.
More than what they're making.
Yeah,
That's right.
Makes
That's
sense,
right. Much
right?
more.
You've spent some time accumulating wealth. Maybe you're making X amount of money, but you've been saving. You've been able to buy a home. All of that stuff. Okay.
That's right. And while blacks and Latinos at that level, between $37,000 and $61,000, have median wealth of $11,000 for Latinos. No, for blacks. I'm sorry, $11,000 for blacks, and $8,600 for Latinos is their median wealth.
Even though they make the same amount of money as these white households, yes.
Well, it's like I was saying about, when I was growing up, you were seeing all your Cosby type heads popping up. And I could even say in my own family, I had an aunt who got a good job with the mayor, and she moved into the penthouses, always had fly clothes, bought art, all that kind of stuff. But she doesn't have anything to pass on. So it's kind of like this whole black middle class idea that we have, and I guess with Latinx folks too, is a little bit of an illusion.
I think it was a big illusion, and part of that illusion was, we'll stay away from the criminal charges, but the Cosby Show, of the 80s that were, talked about this kind of, the TV does a horrible job depicting economic reality in the first place. Because
Right.
one,
Yes.
they would say a doctor and a lawyer who had a brownstone like that in Brooklyn were middle class,
Right.
when clearly that's the top 20%, probably top 10% in terms of income. So that's not even middle class. But the idea that it gave the illusion that many African Americans were at that space, and it didn't highlight the different economic realities that even Black doctors and lawyers have as compared to white doctors and lawyers. One other piece I want to get at is that you're talking about the college the educational differences too. That I think one important piece that we had in the report is that whites with a high school diploma
Yes.
have more wealth than Blacks and Latinos with a 4-year college degree. Right, so it's our understandings of class, right? Of white, we talk about white working class. We
right.
think
and the
of them,
white poor, and like how
Yeah,
they're,
yeah,
how they've been demonized in the media.
Yeah, well, and people too want to say that, once you're poor or working class, we're all the same, but we're not. White working class not having a degree, you're still more likely to be more economically secure than Blacks and Latinos with 4 years degree that have probably professional jobs. And again, this gets to the importance of wealth versus income. Wealth is something that stabilizes you and is usually something developed over generations, which is why, a rise in your income doesn't all of a sudden change your wealth unless it's a rise from like 50,000 to 2 million, right? We have so much of an income that you don't need it for just survival. You can put it away in a lot of different things to help develop wealth. But for most of us, we're just getting 50 to 60,000, 30 to 40,000. And all that means is maybe we don't have to be as late on our bills as we were in the past versus developing wealth.
Yeah, and I think that's why when we talk, when you look at your Cosby's and all of your Black popular media, it's always about a meteoric rise because that's the only thing that's actually going to change your station and your family station.
Well, within one generation.
Yeah, I'm saying within your lifetime that you're going to be able to see.
Yeah.
Well, and again, going back to, I guess highlighting my age, I'll go back to the Jeffersons. I mean, I think the Jeffersons as a TV show, like really highlighted this idea of someone who was, middle class, working class, and then their business exploded and then they were rich, right?
Right.
But at least that was kind of understanding of a big jump and there was a recognition of them being rich. With the Cosbys in the 80s, they tried to normalize a rich lifestyle and act like it was middle class when more and more of America was living like, again, highlighting my age, Roseanne, then we're living like the Cosbys.
I'm gonna request, and if anyone co-signs any of our listeners, that we do an entire show, not this one because there's so much to go on, but an entire show where we talk about the history of Black cinema and how it's been able to bamboozle folks economically in terms of thinking where we are and how it affects our decision making, because there's a whole ton of awesome stuff you're saying there.
Yeah.
I think there's great stuff. And just even outside of Blacks, just economics and TV and just how, whether it's Friends or just how misrepresentation and how it confuses all of us about what it means to be successful or have a middle class lifestyle.
Yeah, like what kind of things you should have in your life, how big your apartment should be, what kinds of things
I've
you should be
still
able to
never
afford.
seen that friend's apartment in New York. Like, not even looking at someone's penthouse have I seen something so spacious. It's like
so
a football
insane.
field in there.
And to bring it into more contemporary times, we can use examples like Modern Family and Blackish.
Right.
I mean, these are like millionaire households,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And that's the quote unquote modern family, right? While wealth has been declining for the median wealth for all Americans has been declining for the last 30 years. So that is not, the modern family is not living in $1 million homes. And they all live in million. There's like 5 families in that show, and they're all in $1 million homes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. Oh my God. I mean, I feel like one of the most sobering stats that I saw in the report was the projections that you have, that by 2024, the median Black and Latinx households are projected to own 60 to 80% less wealth than they did in 1983, which would lead to white households owning 99 and 75 times more wealth than their Black and Latino counterparts. 99 times more wealth.
I can buy a lot of tiki torches.
Yeah.
Too soon.
Oh my God. Ooh, that's only 7 years away.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we wanted that stat in there, is we wanted to show that the changes that are happening, not just 40, 50 years down the road, but in 4 years, in 7 years, that we can lose a lot of ground. which is why it really should be recognized as a national crisis that needs to be addressed with now. It's not being recognized as that, but just to highlight that, bad things are happening over the next few years unless there's dramatic action taken to deal with this.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yo, you people out there, I agree with you. This is a huge national, I would say international crisis because it's the same thing that goes on all around the world. But think of it like this. We don't even have chocolate in our chocolate anymore. That's mostly cocoa butter. They don't actually put chocolate in our chocolate. Don't lose chocolate in our people too. Come on.
Oh, let's go to a
is my
song
favorite.
like that.
This is my favorite show because no other interview do I start rambling about Modern Family and the Jeffersons and start talking about how there's no chocolate in chocolate. Only here, when I'm talking about the racial wealth divide, do I get all of this mix. It's a great thing.
Thank you, dialect.
Well, really, that's what we're here for. And yeah, you're right. Let's
yeah.
we should move on to some music. Actually, I have some
I'll ruminate on this.
Yeah, I have some pretty uplifting music. We start now, well, because we were road to, and I was worried about a few things, so I figured we'd start off on a nice tip. And I got the homie Bastion Killjoy, which I also have to say is what an awesome name,
Yes.
and his song "Road to Freedom." And we'll check you in a minute. Brunch Your Budget, Bonfire Radio.
The Lord is my shepherd. God has a weird way of showing us. We went to church every Sunday. We said grace at every meal. And Mom always thanked Jesus for the sacrifice he made for us. The irony of it all is we all love God when things go well. The fact of the matter is they rarely do.
Walks away from the taste of the pain, ingrained in his shame, never better the letter, tomorrow's forever. Clever little vixen, never measure the pinprick that hits him to live, learn, begin, Tom from his own skin, riveting. Listen, your heart will be too much of an easy path, just ask. We're here to make it hard, disregard the red mark target, so he laughs. She tried to tear it apart, forget the marketing craft. Rather sit in the dark, spin the shit to the stars, write it down, tear it in half. Grab pair together, unaware of what they share, and there's nothing forever, didn't mean anything at any measure. So he sits at home alone and writes these letters that could shatter the competitors' efforts. This is effortless, where there's no editors, directors, doctors, mentors, mental perspectives, octaves, electives, and operatives don't come here to try to collect this. But I saw in a movie once, they knocked on his door with sunglasses and guns. The death of a man for being someone else's son. No time to run, he's ran out before. That knock against the law became something else to ignore. Bug eyes, pale face, slinging jaw. As he screams out, I don't want this anymore. Then please, why don't you stop it before it gets worse? Before it gets worse. He sleeps with the girl that he met before, complex too intense to be direct, collects his closer, doesn't say what she meant. Is it the girl that I resented, the fact that nobody else ever said what they meant? Has they left him for dead, thought he was a severed head she keeps under her bed, thoughts are embedded. Nevertheless, it helps to relieve the stress. I've never been your best, triggers an inner killer collects. No wonder believing, so doesn't need to be blessed just to connect, establish regrets. At 26, is that all there is to depict? Sad emo kids with no way to deal with this, except for what they see on MTV clips. Yeah, they wear cuts, but not on their wrists. So give me a beat, a reason to coexist with this real shit that we all have to deal with. Where whatever clothes the fashion comes and goes, corporate engines will kill this quick. I'll kill it slow, I sound like a prick, but this twisted sickness is the lives that we live. So when I'm alone, she comes around to send her back home. The whirlwind's a hurricane and you reap what you sow. And you can reap what you sow. Tell me something I don't know, and I guess I'll be happy to walk this road alone. Tell me something I don't know, to throw a dog a bone. Tell me something to walk this road I walk alone.
And we are back. Brunch Your Budget, Bonfire Radio. That was Bastion Killjoy with Road to Freedom. He was coming out of Melbourne, Australia. I gotta say, I have to warn you, we have a lot of foreign artists that we're gonna be playing today. 'Cause, I don't know if our American artists have enough of a visual concept of freedom to make songs about it. It would be too much like fan fiction for us to talk about freedom. But Melbourne, they hit,
Yeah, okay, they got it. We We are here talking about, speaking of roads, I like your themes. You've been doing good at those for the last, 170 episodes or whatever.
Yes.
We're here talking with Dedrick Asante-Muhammad, the Senior Fellow of the Racial Wealth Divide Initiative at Prosperity Now, and they just put out a new report, The Road to Zero Wealth. Google it if you want to read the whole report and cry a little bit.
You really
prepare
need-
yourself.
By the way, DJ, you need in your title somewhere ending or stopping the rate. Because, whenever we're talking about you, like, oh, yeah, he's a senior fellow of the racial wealth divide. It sounds like you won some award for dividing.
Yeah. I wish, because that means maybe I could close it if I started it. And that's one of the things the report does get into as well. We talk a little bit about the history. We were talking about income and wealth, and how wealth is something that accrues over generations. And that's what's happened in this country, right? Like a lot of people forget that they think the country has always been majority middle class, but that was something that was created. It wasn't just a free market, though there was a very strong economy in the 40s and 50s, but it was also mass government investment, right? There was more money put into investing in the middle class than there was money that went into rebuilding Europe after World War II. And we were successful in creating the middle class. But it was a white middle class.
Right.
It was intentionally designed to be a white middle class, and they had implementation to make sure that blacks and people of color weren't getting the same benefits out of the GI Bill, out of Social Security as it was originally constructed. And so there was this mass investment into the middle class for whites, and it's still primarily white people who are enjoying this white middle class status. And part of the argument of the report is, if you want to have a 21st century middle class economy, we have to invest for the first time into people of color and bring them into this middle class and particularly middle wealth status that we think is essential for financial stability.
Wow. I mean, I feel like that, because that was one of my questions. I saw that in the report, just the history. And you've talked about this on the show before, like the Homestead Act in the 1890s, and then this mass investment into the middle class in the 40s and 50s, like you just mentioned. And I feel like there's so much rhetoric out there saying like, well, black and brown people just don't work hard enough. And if they just stop being so lazy and stop taking government assistance, then maybe they would be where we are today. And I feel like I hear that more than anything.
No, that's right. It's that false narrative because most people don't understand, refuse to understand that it was government assistance that helped create a middle class economy, right? It wasn't just all of a sudden people started working in the 40s, right? It was that there was, this massive investment into World War II and a recognition that as people are coming home, we have to create space for them economically. And so they got government assistance. And if we want to continue a middle class economy, that also requires continued government investment. And this time we got to be inclusive for the first time of people of color.
Yeah, and for people who are afraid of certain buzzwords, that means regulation, that means bigger government, that means government doing the job of why you have a government.
Yeah, that means more government assistance. That means, and I also want to get into the tax breaks, because that's another, I feel like that's another aspect of it is, tax breaks that actually help lower income people.
That's right.
People of color.
That's right, because even before we have to spend, let's say, more money on helping people develop their wealth, what people don't realize is we spend over $650 billion a year on wealth and asset developments. That's a good amount of money, $650 billion. The problem is that money disproportionately goes to the wealthy, to those who have the most income, the most wealth. And so one of the first things we could do is we could stop spending $650 billion a year that disproportionately goes to the wealthy for an asset development program, and instead put an asset development program where it belongs, those with low wealth. And then that would be disproportionately people of color. And that could help deal with issues of stabilizing the middle class and bringing in communities who historically have never been part of the middle class. One of the things in the report, we note that if you look at the benefits from the tax code, that millionaires on average receive about $161,000 benefits in tax deductions and write-offs, these types of things, while the working families receive about $226, right? So
what?
We could change that.
That's a joke.
We can change that.
But I wish it was a joke, right?
Right?
It's those are real numbers.
Oh, yeah.
And what scares me the most is that too oftentimes conservatives want to argue we need more tax breaks for the rich, instead of recognizing that they already are getting so much, and it's leaving the middle class behind, and those who are never in the middle class even farther behind.
Right. And I feel like this is a perfect argument to, yes, we do have the money for this. Like, people are saying, like, giving out more money. What do you mean? It's like, no, it's shifting who gets the money.
That's right. That's right. We're already spending that. That's not even a new big government program. It's let's at least use the money that we're using today and do it in a progressive manner. And so and the report tries to get to this as well, that as the country becomes more majority minority, you can't have as strong as an economy if the majority of the people have median wealth of $500, or as this report highlights, the median wealth for blacks, if it keeps going the way it has been going from 1983 to 2013, by 2053, is why we call it the road to zero wealth, blacks will have a median wealth of zero, meaning 50% of African Americans will have have less than zero wealth, and the other 50% will, be above that zero. And 20 years later, Latinos, which is the fastest growing group, will also be at this space of a median wealth of zero. So again, like this will have dramatic effects on the American economy. No longer can this be a strong consumer-based economy because we don't have strong consumers anymore.
Right.
Yeah, then we've just got a fiefdom.
Yeah.
No, that's right.
Like straight up and down.
Right. Well, then it's like, then we're going to have to be doing something else, because I just learned this. I probably should have known this a long time ago, but I was at a financial planning conference. 70% of the gross domestic product in the U.S. is consumer spending, y'all.
Yeah.
70%
that's right.
of the spending in this country is on consuming. So if people don't have the money to consume things, this does affect you.
Yeah, it's our whole thing. It's why people talk about universal basic income and all that.
Yeah.
That's right, because no matter how rich you are, you can only consume so much. Like,
right.
Your shoes can only be so expensive, and you can only have so many.
Yeah.
Most consumption is going to come from the masses of people, and that's why this concentration of income and wealth isn't good. And wealth in particular, the report also highlights that the top 10% in the country in terms of income have 30% of the income as a whole, while the top 10% of those, the wealthiest 10% have 90% of the country's wealth, right? So that's how concentrated our wealth is, and how much more concentrated is in income.
Okay, say that again. The top 10% of the wealthiest Americans, or the wealthiest?
Yes.
Have 90% of the wealth?
In the country. That is correct. The wealthiest 10% have 90%.
That's like all of it.
Yeah, except for 10%. Yeah, you're right.
Well,
it is.
That's the thing.
Absolutely right.
It's going to drop to zero, and when it drops to zero, I mean, as it is, it's hard to blame people for radical thoughts and ideas, considering that the system is clearly broken and does not include them. But when the system literally doesn't include them at all, I mean, what kind of system is that? Isn't that one that people will just ignore?
Right.
At that point?
Yeah.
Oh, and actually, I want to be more exact. I'm sorry. I looked at the 8. I thought the 9 was the 8. I thought the 8 was a 9. It's 80% of the country's wealth. The wealthiest 10% have 80% of the country's wealth.
That's still pretty much all of it.
Yeah, it's still pretty much all of it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is insane. Yeah, because just to go back to Dialect's point, like, when it gets to zero, then
what do you do?
What do you do?
Yeah, like, you still
you
work
don't want to be part of the system
your job
anymore.
where you're getting negative returns?
Yeah.
Nah.
Well, let's look at this. I mean, if the median wealth for blacks now is $1,700 and Latinos is $2,000, that's not that far from zero. I mean, like what is $1,700 but a small car accident, right? And it's gone.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's we're already pretty close, and that, as you noted, that's going to go down by a lot in just 7 years. So again, when people are wondering why African Americans and Latinos aren't having that type of economic progress they would expect, even with the college degree, it's because you need that foundation of wealth to help take advantage of opportunities, to help you deal with economic challenges you find, or the ups and downs of the economy. And right now, already, most blacks and Latinos don't have enough wealth to deal with those types of issues.
Well, I mean, and speaking of college education, like, what comes with a college education is debt. And a built-in, negative net worth right when you leave college.
And if you're already starting at a deficit.
Yeah.
like a lot of folks are gonna be.
Yeah. Then climbing out of it, I mean, that's 10, 20
Yo,
years.
Here's another terrible way to think about this for folks listening.
Awesome.
Zero wealth means check to check at best for your entire life.
Yeah.
At best, your best you can hope
Yeah.
for is living check to check.
And Ray Bashara, who works out of the Federal Reserve out of St. Louis, he wrote an interesting piece in the Washington Post that highlighted how Black college graduates have seen their wealth decline over the last 30 years, while white wealth has been increasing at a good amount. So even when you're doing, and Black college graduates 4-year degrees, so even when you're doing what you're supposed to be, and you're kind of already the elite, you're still not building that wealth. And again, it's because, a very basic way to define this is that if you're first generation going to college, you're probably not getting money from your family to help you, put money down for a down payment or to pay for your wedding or what have you.
You're
probably helping your aunt or your uncle with rent, right?
Yep.
So even though your income's decent, you can't use it to invest in wealth. You're using it to pay off your expenses and your family and community's expenses. And that's what makes racial wealth inequality, I said this before on the show, so devastating. It's an individual. It's when you're an individual, your family and your whole community is in asset poverty. It takes a lot of money for you to be able to have before you feel like you can spend it on yourself for a little bit of private investment, because you're trying to help so many other people survive.
Yeah, totally. Well, and that's why I feel like it sounds like that, like, catching up is a matter of not only like helping the people who are in your family and in your life now, but then you have to make enough to take care of yourself. So there's a double catch up going on.
I was just thinking in my head, I have to balance helping out my aunt with helping out my kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
How do you balance that?
Yeah. And how do you balance it? And people do it every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Like
I mean,
Yeah.
People are doing that every day. And so, we were talking before about like financial planning, and I do think this is all like a lot of bad news and what have you, but I do think it can be helpful, because I think if you don't understand the challenges, you keep thinking that you're making the wrong investment, or you're just balancing your checkbook wrong, instead of not realizing that the way you've been taught to balance your checkbook doesn't take into effect that your whole community is in asset poverty, and you can't build wealth the way oftentimes most financial education programs just lay out. You have to be much more conservative and much more basic on the wealth building scale. Because I talk to people about this all the time. They're like, oh, I'm making 6 figures, so I should be at this type of financial education, talking about stocks, but you have no wealth. So you still need to be at the beginning stages of making sure you have enough savings, making sure you have your retirement set up. Then you can start talking about stocks or, getting a home or these types of things. So it really, once you understand that, it doesn't have to be depressing. It should help you better plan out your financial future, or what are best practices for yourself.
Yeah, like understanding those basic steps. Well, and I feel like also, I know what these stats do for me is like, it reminds you that it's not you. You're not crazy. It's not all your fault. I feel like there's a lot of blame that we put on ourselves in general when it comes to finance and when it comes to our ability to manage them. And
that's right.
Yeah, and understanding that like you started behind, and there's a lot of things that were put in place in this country to keep you there. It's like, okay, so then it's really, I mean, I don't want to say it's not your fault or whatever it is, but I mean, on some level, it's not your fault.
No, I mean, it's not.
Yeah,
it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the fault of individual, because again, these false narratives. The narrative in this country, the country wants to hold up, is that everyone can come here and become middle class, or and really mean middle class, mean a lot wealthier than middle class.
Yeah.
Right. And if you don't, something's wrong with you. Instead of recognizing that there's something wrong with our system, where 10%, the wealthiest 10%, have about 80% of the country's wealth. There's something wrong with the system as a whole.
Yeah, totally. Well, so, I mean, I feel like one of the other things that you specifically point out in the report is, even before Trump got elected, it was going in this direction.
That's right.
Now, with the policies that this administration is putting in place, what is at risk? What is at stake?
Well, yeah, and again, that's where we're trying to highlight this idea of what could happen between 2020 and 2024, is that if things don't get worse, right, Black wealth will go from, in 2013, $1,700 to $1,400 in 2020, down to $1,200 in 2024. That's if things don't get worse. If policies, if even more regressive policies are put forward, we could see things, deteriorate that much more quickly. So, we do have to be concerned about what this current administration is doing, and if we can push them forward to take any positive action. I will say what I do appreciate, this is kind of outside this topic, but I do appreciate this new healthcare bill that's being put forward in that it's putting forth the most kind of radical, progressive, single-payer health bill that we've seen in a long time in the Senate. And it's doing it under the Trump administration, under Republican Congress and Senate. Oftentimes people are saying, oh, we can't get anything done, so don't put forward the big ideas. But I do appreciate, people can critique the single-payer system, and that's cool, but I just appreciate the boldness of, I'm going to put forward what I think is really needed, whether it's politically the exact right time for it or not. And I think we need to be more bold about that around racial equity issues and racial economic inequality issues.
Yeah,
Word to that.
I love that. What other policy interventions need to happen?
There's so many. I think the tax system is huge. I would also look at, and this is kind of conservative, but what can we do around homeownership, right? I mean, homeownership has been is number one source of wealth for most middle income people. And, we still have whites, a little over 70% of homeowners, while blacks and Latinos are around 45 or less percent of homeowners.
That's
and so
significantly less.
Yes. Yeah. And so we need to bridge that divide. And again, I think the way we're going to do it, whites didn't become majority homeowners until you had strong home ownership programs in the 40s and 50s. And so we're going to have to actually put more work into doing that. Now, there's some really bold proposals out there. People like Sandy Darity and Derek Hamilton have been writing some great stuff about the need to guarantee full employment, to make sure that everyone actually guaranteed jobs for everyone, right? And
what
this
would that
isn't
look like?
Well, and this isn't such a new idea, right? I mean, this idea obviously had been kind of going around in the 30s and 40s, where they tried to make that through a whole bunch of different type of government employment programs. Something, it wasn't full employment because they were in such a deep depression, but it was just trying to create mass government employment. But even in the 60s with the civil rights movement, there was a recognition that you can't have racial inequality unless you have racial economic inequality. And I think the idea, I mean, and a lot of people say, the government doesn't create jobs, the government can't create jobs, which is crazy because the United States government is the number one. If you compare that to McDonald's, more people work for the government, the federal government, than work for McDonald's. So they already create many jobs. I think you can look around your neighborhoods and you can see, we could use more, public safety officers, stronger social worker assistants, after school programs, universal pre-care and aftercare that is subsidized by, federal investment, federal policy. And again, the idea is that there would be jobs that at least everyone can get into the job market. It wouldn't be everybody's making 80,000. It would be lower wage jobs. But for so many people, the problem is once you're out of the labor market, you can't get back in. So this would be a good entry point where everyone can kind of get back, can build up their resume a little bit, and then eventually go into the private sector. It's not, the ideal isn't to have everyone working the public sector forever, though there's nothing wrong with that. My wife's been working the public sector for 8-10 years, and we hope for her to retire from there. But we recognize that you need a public sector and a private sector part of the economy. So again, I would Google Sandy Darity and Derek Hamilton. They've written some great pieces on this full employment. There are these much bigger and bolder ideas, which I think actually is going to be necessary for 21st century because of the way the economy is going. We don't have mass manufacturing with thousands of workers in a plant, right? You have Facebook and these massive companies with just a few thousand employees sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think, Dialect alluded to universal basic income, and we're definitely going to do a show on that. But I agree with you. I feel like that for all of us to really get out of this, it has to be something radical. It has to be something that is a turning point and turns the corner on what's going on right now. Because, man, I just keep thinking 7 years is nothing.
No,
that's
right.
a blink. That's
right.
That's one or two presidents, really, Well,
and I think a lot of our identity politics has had stuff to do with it because we've been a mix of doing your capitalism stuff and also a lot of socialism, mostly corporate socialism. And I think all of these policies require stuff that people are visibly going to see as socialism. Yeah. And going to be afraid of it.
Right.
And I noticed that's become it's been an ideological standoff when it's really an economic one.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
and
that's a good
and
point.
again, it was radical. It was radical change in policy to create the American middle class in the first place.
Yeah. How
Like, people
quickly we
forget
forget.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was radical policy, and people were calling it socialist, right?
Yeah,
And we're
Right.
saying,
he was not happy with that stuff.
yeah, and it's going to take, if you want to go, and that's what this report's trying to highlight. We're going in the wrong direction. We're going in a radically wrong direction. And so if you want to change that, you have to make some radical turns of policies, and we need to do that soon. So, I think people should be less scared of radical changes. They should be more scared of where the country is going
Right, that
and
it's
has been
staying
going
the
for the last
same.
30 years.
Yeah.
Well, and these radical changes are things that, at least in some form or fashion, we have done before
That's
to
right.
success.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's
Yeah.
the thing it's crazy to me. Like, when you talk
Yes.
about this building the middle class stuff, it's understandably short-sighted to build a middle class where you only build one group of people, despite not kicking out or killing the other group.
Right.
Since the other groups are still
Still here.
well, then what danger is there in trying again with the whole building a middle class?
Or just like letting
and just
everyone do it.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm
Yeah,
too naive for that. I'm just saying.
Well, and I will say, I think there is, even though there is, strong divisions and strong racial divisions, I think there is a recognition that the direction we've been going for the last 30 years hasn't been working.
Right.
And I think that's
For
why
everyone.
you see people supporting unusual candidates like Trump or like Bernie Sanders, and there's more talk about, and even Trump, when he was campaigning, was talking about the need to raise taxes on the rich, on people like himself. Now, he hasn't done that.
Right.
And his policy proposals aren't doing that, but on the campaign trail, he talked about that, and his quote unquote conservative crowds like that line, right? So I
Right.
think there is more of a recognition that the country, has been too much for the few and not for the many. It just, can we get past some of our historical racial divisions to, do something that'll improve life for everybody.
Right. Ooh, I love it. Dialect. Let's go to a song while we let that marinate.
Again, we're gonna go to Foreignlandia to see how they've done their thing, and I feel like this cat, at least from the place he is, he could give us a little bit of thoughts about division and economic disparities. He's from the Ukraine, and it's an MC called Honor with a song called Road 2. And you'll check in a second. Brunch Your Budget, Bonfire Radio.
Слова сами находят язык. Это примкнет ко мне однажды, как лего в свои пазы. Сминает кроны, как Дирекс. И я покажу и воистину стейк. На очередном треке вновь зашок на бедре. Ты вонзай в него, как баллон, свой клинок. Прежде чем мои задачи закуют ремни, я нырну в мешок. Всей головой позволь мне собраться на топ-чарту твоих мыслей. Дай побыть в приоритете среди текстов песен не мною написанных. Я найду, где разбить лагерь в этих чертогах млистых. Покуда не зрим конец, вино скрывает дно бокала. Я по-прежнему взрываю так этим бокалом, как и присущий мне пол накала. Этот майк глотал мой член поглубже, чем ты его тогда глотала. Я ступил на порог Гана 6 лет назад, и я казался ранним в этой теме, где потехи ради нужно уметь искусство ранить словами. Но я дерзко позвякиваю своими бубенцами над твоим ухом по сей день. Все еще на ножах с отцами. Все тот же рыцарь, пропивший латы, которую гоняет коня у принца. А она близ меня, а значит, что вы ебаный принципы Будь я коктейлем, то ты бы вместо палки корицы вкусила бы мой хуй размером с разбиткой метрополитена в столице. Я чувствую культ, когда уже вроде вплоть до греческий колен давал себе колобродить на чужих релизах, как не слезая с чужих колен, и делаю впрыск моего бутики Mortal. Это мой очередной плюк тебе в морду, когда ты говоришь, что человек не может поменять свою природу.
We are back. Brunch and Budget, Bonfire Radio. That was The Road to by Honor out of the Ukraine. That was rough, right? The slowdown, and it got all crazy at the end.
Yeah, it did. Oh man, that was really good. All right, so do we have any good news, Dedrick?
My good news will be that I've been happy that the report, The Road to Zero Wealth, How the Racial Wealth Divide is Hollowing Out America's Middle Class, has received a decent amount of press attention, even though we've only put it out a few days ago.
Yeah.
You said USA Today published our op-ed. The Guardian did a good piece on it. Forbes did a piece on it. I know we have some interviews for NPR coming up. I said we had to, break this on your podcast first, and then we can do all the other radio shows.
That.
So first Brunch and Budget, then we can get to NPR and those other smaller shows.
So much appreciated. I love it.
Yeah,
and I think we are in a time in this country, like with this Trump administration, where everyone is paying more attention and things are more heightened, and people are looking to see what we do need to change, right? Whether it happens under this administration or not, this report is in so many ways like undeniable. Like we were talking during the song just about like this data is basic data. It's census data. It's data from like, the Consumer Finance Board and things like that. It's not data that like came from like calling 100 people and asking how they felt about their finances.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And this is one reason why I think I've said this too before on your show, why I like talking about race and economics together, because so much of racial discussions can be about how I feel about something or like how I perceive something or how many, but this is just straight numbers. We know if median income for some groups going up, if it's going down for others, what have you. And again, these aren't, if people question our report, look up the numbers for yourselves and see, go to the Heritage Foundation website and see what numbers they use. You see, they use the same sources we do, right? And they can't come to very different conclusions because they don't, because the numbers, only tell you what the numbers tell you. But again, I like grounding it in a reality that it's hard for people to say you're making up.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and what do you say to the people who, like, for our listeners, who I'm sure you're all with us, right, y'all? So what do you say when you run into people who think or say, like, well, this doesn't affect me? And, these stats are not something that I need to be concerned about.
Well, yeah, I mean, and again, that's why we do have how the racial wealth divide is hollowing out America's middle class. Because again, we don't have to get into discussions just about what's going to happen in the future. We've already seen that since 1983 to 2013, we've seen that the median wealth for the entire country has gone down from around 74,000 down to 64,000.
Wow.
And that decrease is being led by the decrease of Black and Latino wealth. Because again, white wealth during that time period was going up. It was only Black and Latino wealth going down. So we're already seeing, honestly, we said that to have middle class wealth, you need 68,000. Right now, the median wealth for all Americans is 64,000. So we already have the majority of this country not having enough wealth to be what we consider middle class wealth. So it's affecting you. It's affecting you now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what can we do? What can like I do or Dialect do or like someone who's listening do for our own personal finance? He's like looking around.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for your own personal finance, I think one thing too, it's helpful to understand, because oftentimes when we hear about wealth, we hear of yachts, we hear of millions of dollars, instead of recognizing that wealth is the $500 you have in the bank to help you with a bad time. And if you want to build that wealth, then, have a goal in 6 months to have $700 in the bank, right? And so to understand, wealth is, and too, for progressives and leftists and a lot of people I hang out with, wealth is important for all of us, right? And we all should be having wealth building strategies for ourselves, because even, you know, if you're a teacher and you're doing all this great work in the community, if you're not financially secure, it makes it much more difficult for you to serve the community and serve those around you. So, you know, you have to do some financial security for yourself. And then the more wealth you have, the more resources you have to go and help others build their wealth. So, you know, I do hope, you know, I'm talking about large numbers, but I think people need to understand that wealth is something that affects us all, and we all can do, even if the racial wealth divide is growing, we can at least try to stabilize our finances the best way possible and recognize that the importance of wealth is not the things you have, but the resources that you develop to help you take advantage of economic opportunities in the future or deal with economic hard times you might face.
Word.
I love that. And I love just how you define wealth is not like having $1 million in the bank. Because I think when people, they confuse wealth with
Or an
wealthy.
unreachable number.
Yeah, they confuse
Yes.
wealth with wealthy, and this idea of like, oh, like high net worth or like rich, like they equate those two words together, and they're not the same.
And for Black and Latino middle class, higher income, we try to oftentimes to have symbols of wealth, even though we don't have the wealth to back it up. So it's like, I can't really afford this car, but my white coworkers have this car, so I'm going to have it to make it look like I have wealth. But what's really important is that you have wealth, not that you go into debt, weaken your wealth, and have symbols of wealth, but actually you're just bringing on debt. So try to understand the difference between the symbolism and the reality, and reality will always have a more profound impact than the symbolism.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Ooh, that's good.
Reality will always have a more profound impact than symbolism.
Yes.
I'm saying you. Because, yo, I've been in rap battles and been hit with many a punchline, and none of them hit as hard as a good right cross. Reality will knock you down every time.
Yeah.
Dang.
I'm glad you like that one.
Dang, that was good. Yeah. Well, and people who are listening, like, keep in mind, wealth is the idea of wealth and the concept of it is really just a translation of like what resources you have access to and how much time you'll be able to give yourself to continue on with the next generation or to continue on with the rest of your life, you know? And I think go ahead. Yeah.
No, and you know, and to go along with that, I mean, when you don't have a lot of individual wealth, one of the things that everyone does, I mean, even millionaires, they use other people's wealth, other institutions' wealth to leverage and strengthen theirs. And so we need to do the same, even more so, that if you don't have a lot of money in the bank, you need to work with your neighbor, your friend, your family to leverage whatever resources they have. Maybe they can babysit. Maybe they can, you know, help your kid do something. Maybe they can, you know, maybe they have a car you don't, right? And so you all can go do some joint trips together. You can help them get stuff and they can drive you. But we have to leverage the wealth because there is wealth all around us. There's assets. And you just in America, we have this idea that it's all about you. And if you don't do it all yourself, you're not really going to be successful. But it doesn't work that way. You have to work with others.
Yes.
Yo, I was going to save this for the very end, but I want to piggyback on this because this is basically my whole thing about all of this selfishness. It's like, feel free to be selfish. Feel free to make it all about you. Feel free to think that it's all about you. Just have a 360 view, because if you take 100% of the whatever and leave me with zero, yeah, you know what? I'm a nice guy. I'm strong. I can deal with it. I'll congratulate you on your win and wither away maybe. But my kids didn't see the stuff I saw and didn't have all that kind of stuff and don't have me around to stop them. So for your own safety, you have to worry about what's going on in your community. You have to worry about your own wealth and the wealth of those around you. Because if it all doesn't go up, then what you doing on that island by yourself?
Yeah.
No, and that's the idea of having a middle class economy, right? It's the idea that there's actually that you need a collective of people doing well in order to help the country move forward as a whole. And as we're trying to highlight is that we're losing that. And we've been losing that for a while, and many of us were never allowed to be a part of it. And so if you really want to, you know, have a strong 21st century America, we have to have a much more collective approach, because again, if you're just out for self, you're going to find out, and even those who are just out for self, they don't succeed by themselves. Even though those who are most out for themselves use other people to build themselves and might not give back. And so you can't deny that it takes collective wealth to even move an individual forward. And I think we need to have more of that strategy, because most of us don't want to just move forward by ourselves. We want to move forward with our friends, our family, and the community around us. We don't want to be doing really well, but being in a rundown neighborhood that's violent or what have you. We want the neighborhood to be positive.
Yeah, we don't want to do this by ourselves. It's so true. Oh, I love that so much. So where can we find you? Where can we find this report?
Any other things that you wanted to mention before we roll out?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, and I'll say I didn't get enough into this, but this report is with Prosperity Now and another nonprofit that I used to work for called Institute for Policy Studies. And Institute for Policy Studies has one of the best websites on inequality I've seen called inequality.org. So I definitely recommend checking out inequality.org. Check out Prosperity Now's website, prosperitynow.org. If you want to look at particularly racial economic information, check out our Bridging the Racial Wealth Divide Facebook page. We do daily updates of the best information around racial wealth inequality. And then we also do that podcast in coordination with you all, the Race and Wealth podcast.
Yeah.
So those are all things that people can get more information on this type of work.
Yes. Soak it in, everybody. Soak it in. Build wealth with your communities. Know that it's not your fault. Know that the system was built like this, and we need radical change to make sure that everyone rises up.
It's like I've been saying about lots of things. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I'm just saying, right?
I love it. It's so true. All right.
Yo, we'll finish off back in the States. There are rappers from
there
here.
is hope here.
Well, actually, I found this. This is a recent track by some classic New York underground hip hop cats, the Addams family with a T, Atoms family. This is Cryptic One and Wind Breeze. I remember when I first came to New York, Cryptic One was one of the top weird it's when the underground was weird and all over the place, and people were sesquipedalian as all get out. If you know what that means, you know what that means. If you don't, then you know. And this is their song Hero to Zero, and we will check you next week. Run your budget, Bonfire Radio. Read the report, but it's gonna be all right. Peace.
Adams. Check. Adams. This ain't a game of poker, and nah, it ain't no court cases. Laughter's like the Joker or Walter inside the crawl space. Catwoman shattered it, had to leave his bad rope out of place, too safe. Reflectors in his mad exposed. The end is soon, you can feel that doom looming. We save the whales, don't give a hoot about the humans. Insult the so-called sultan by calling his kettle black. Impulse to revolt, pumping molten metal rap. He had some good days and his head drift to the canopies. Ran out of Kool-Aid, so now he's drinking antifreeze. His henchman, yes man, sucking on his man memories. His new flag banner reads crappy rap jamboree. Surely I don't just such a mess and lacks action. Best bet, confess, just ask the black chaplain. One heathen to another, brother stop laughing. When the ship goes down, guess what? So does the captain.
Place that I touch this life is a perfect example of how my growth is an ample portion. The poster listen slips in soil, cloaked in vision. Hits the nail and ends the coffin. No statistics, X or Y could never really do the best to be the buoyancy support ship. Float the graphic, close the caption. No more captive assets. No propellers, no expansion, just subtracting facets. Rusty waters, dripping faucets make you feel you forced it. Euphoric acid floors the fascinating average cabbage. But unbeknownst to sound a wither with a fountain dribble. Count on instances where pigeons shit on statues, clearance value. The here and now post through the presence of a timeless essence. Etched in stone, my heart is beating beauty in the dark allegiance. Battle for the listeners' ears, hissing jeers, listless spheres of syndicates and tinted window vignettes of inner threats of vintage sentences that stink of insignificance with stencils that'll singe your flesh with every breath. Unsure of where you going or where you think you are. Ain't no shine up in your star, and your world is made of fiction. Fiction, your world is made of fiction. Don't take it very hard, cause you made it pretty far. But you slacking on your job, so we no longer listen.
Beat the fail flight of the Skylark. Pot calling night dark. Fast forward to the fight parts. Divvy up the pie charts. Debate where life starts. Blindsided by the end. Chum to them life sharks. Misguided by the trends. So many followers. Not much and follow back. Following with no leading. Now look at where you wallow at. dreaming of what ifs and could have been.
It is what it is.
And that's exactly what it should have been.
Should have been so sweet, but asphyxiated with all them life addictions. Asphyxiate the date and time, it takes to tamper wisdom. The tinted windows of your soul see the savage systems. When average systems work, but actions make the passion sail. The body twitches, itches instantaneously, lifts him above the ground. It's like the sound of silence splits his visions. Exposure bleeds the light of memories that pass the rail. The train is dripping juices from your tragedy grill.
Your minimum effort led straight to maximum fail. Didn't pave the road to hell, but patch that secondary trail. If all you had was a hammer, every problem you'd see a nail. Latest problem is your coffin, so let common sense prevail. Hit it on the head, right? Young buck stuck in headlights. Life hands you lemons, spike the lemonade and get nice. Little vice for the viceroy, now looking less than regal. This slice of humble pie should destroy your fragile ego.
Yeah, that taste is not so pleasant, palate upon the cliff of eagles. The claws are grasping, but they loosen because the grip is see-through. The preview paints the sequel, lends itself to scattered dreams. Who listens to it, wastes their energy and adds the crap beneath you. So watching your step is probably the best advice as you leaking keys to open the doors to copious scores of people that believe you. But the longer don't, cause your words are sands and the castles they impeach you. The once that was to the all that